série de séminaires, donc, comme annoncé dans mon mail, sur tout ce qui est risque financier et régulation. C'est un grand honneur en fait, et pour vous et pour moi, d'avoir Karen Van Hill qui a honoré notre invitation pour démarrer cette série. C'est vraiment démarrer en beauté cette série de séminaires. Et donc Karen, je pense, on va dire deux mots un petit peu de tout ce qu'il a. Je pense que tout le monde le connaît de façon internationale. Certains le surnomment Monsieur Solvency 2. Mais je pense qu'on aura un bel exposé, que vous pouvez parler un petit peu de ce que vous avez fait. Des petites anecdotes, ça peut être très sympathique pour tout le monde. Et si vous avez des questions, des choses comme ça, je pense que souvent on procède de façon assez informelle. J'en avais prévenu Karen qu'on peut poser des questions même pendant, et sans aucune honte de poser n'importe quelle question.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be back in Paris. I do remember that I have given several presentations on Solvency II in Paris at different occasions when we were working on it. But just imagine for a moment that you get up in the morning and somebody comes to you and says, I want you to develop a new solvency regime for the insurance industry that is at least as good as the capital adequacy regime applicable to banks. What would you do? I asked myself the question, is it possible to do that? And we started to work. That was 2004, and this is now Solvency II. I wanted it to be principle-based. That's what it is. Everything is in here. It is a wonder, ladies and gentlemen, that it happened. It would not have happened if the proposal was not made in 2007, but would have been made in 2009, because then we had a financial crisis. And if we had had a financial crisis, there would never have been a proposal, because we in Europe were incapable of dealing with that. But at the same time, it is my view that it is a blessing for the insurance industry that we have Solvency II. If we hadn't had Solvency II, many insurance companies in Europe would no longer exist today. That is, I think, lessons that we have learned from the past. Well, insurance is about risk. And you know that when you work in the insurance industry, that people are naturally risk averse. And that's the very important role of the insurance industry. It's the industry that has to go to the people to say, are you sure you're protected against these risks? And people don't like to be reminded of that. But it's the role of the industry to do that. And because insurance is sold and not bought, we have lots of rules dealing with the sale of insurance products. Because not all the products that are being sold are necessary. Not all risks are equally important or should be insured. But life would be at the same time unlivable if everybody would have to take care of all the risks, which is the case still today in a number of countries in the world. The insurance industry can help public authorities to deal with major challenges. And you know those. They exist in France, they exist in all European countries, they exist all over the world. And I have listed them. Longevity. It's a problem that people won't die anymore. It takes too long for people to die. It's a problem.
A nice problem.
It's a nice problem, but we consider it as a problem. It is a risk. Health, aging, poverty, unemployment, natural catastrophe, cybersecurity, I can list some more. And that is my conclusion. I've reminded the insurance industry many times when you work on Solvency II. That's your role. You must take on those risks. If you do that, you are the sector of the future. I would not say that about the banking sector. What is the reality? Not all major risks are insured. I don't know if you've seen the latest data released by, I think it was Munich Re, saying that last year was the most terrible year ever in terms of natural catastrophes, in terms of the damage caused by natural catastrophes. Only 1/3 of the damage was actually insured. So a lot of risks still are not insured. Many insurance products that are being sold are completely irrelevant. EIOPA, the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority based in Frankfurt, has released a paper with the European supervisors a year or two ago about mobile phone insurance. Do you know that in many policies of mobile insurance, the theft of the mobile phone is not included? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Some of the policies that are being sold on the market. China, the Chinese supervisors just released a message to the insurance industry that they should stop selling crap insurance products. So that is a reality that is true all over the world. Insurers often behave like bankers. And I found it so funny when we're discussing about long-term guarantees. Omnibus 2, you remember the difficult debates we had to the finalization of Solvency 2. But insurers often behave like bankers. They sell just n'importe quoi. But if you ask the insurers, should we deal with you like bankers? They say, oh, no, 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 we have a different business model. But look at their behavior. Under Solvency 1, risks were often not properly priced. I'm sure you know quite a few of those. The life sector is a very good example. And I can tell you, until the last days of negotiation on Solvency 2, life companies in Europe were still offering guaranteed products at rates which the market could never offer them. But they continue doing it. Solvency 1 allowed them to have a nice solvency margin. You wouldn't even see it from the margin. Insurers have difficulties to work with a principle-based solvency regime because they are risk averse. And that's why the book is thick. People sometimes ask me, why did you depart from principle-based? I tell you why. Because the directive Solvency 2, there's only 60 articles dealing with Solvency 2. 60. And I invite all of you to read these articles because they contain the principles. And that's the only thing that really matters. But when I tell people that's the principle, then the industry comes and says, but what does it mean in my particular situation? And my answer now to them is, don't ask me, because I'm going to issue a rule. Try to work with these principles. Focus on the substance and not on the form. Absence of proper risk management and a well-developed risk culture were important reasons why it took so long to develop Solvency 2. Well, that's the insurance industry. And you can probably tell me, but the supervisors are even worse. Well, let's talk to about the supervisors. The reality. What was insurance solvency before Solvency 2? You all had to fill out forms. There was somebody at the supervisory authority that you were hoping would read the form. But I tell you, when I had to deal with the Solvency 1 bureaucracy, I couldn't believe that people could possibly find this exciting. It was horrible. Form over substance. You had to fill out a form. Like all these investments, you could only invest so much in these assets, you know. But of course, the list did not include certain very durable assets. But you could invest in that because they were not on the list. Insurance supervisors were afraid to visit the insurer. It's so much nicer to sit in the office and to send requests for information, to go and see these people, to try to understand how they operate, what their problems are, was not part of Solvency 1. Many supervisors did not have real market experience. And indeed, moving from supervision to the industry, or back from industry to supervision, was and still is in many countries seen as not to be done. I am not one of those who supports that philosophy, but it is still true in a number of countries. And indeed, insurance supervisors also prefer detailed rules. Why do they do that? Because when they tell you to do something, you will ask them, where does the law tell you that I have to do that? So that's why insurance supervisors want detailed rules, but you also want that. So both of you have agreed to have a book, because these are the rules, ladies and gentlemen. And still, it is my belief that there is not one insurer in Europe that can apply and comply with all the rules. Does that matter? No, it does not matter. For this very simple reason that it is substance over form. We have to look at the principles, and many of the detailed rules are not strictly necessary. The clarifications, but it does not mean that you need necessarily to do it with the same. So I have some questions for you, because it is already lunchtime. What do you think insurance is? Can anybody tell me what insurance is? Yeah.
Socialization of risk.
Socialization of risk.
Transfer of risk. Yeah, but this is insurance.
Transfer of risk.
Mutualization.
Elements of what I would consider insurance, but I can tell you that the insurance supervisors worldwide have not yet been able to define what insurance is. Because when you define what it is, you at the same time define what it is not. And they want to continue selling things as insurance, which in fact are not insurance. The other question, are you comfortable to work with principles? Do you have experience with that?
Sometimes they can be difficult to interpret. There's two principles, for instance, proportionality and prudent person.
Yes.
We all have different views, and particularly the insurer and the supervisor might have quite different views.
Yeah.
Views on it.
But that is not a problem.
It's common sense, but
Well, I like the word common sense.
their common sense, the supervisor's common sense, might be different from our common sense.
I think that's very true. But ladies and gentlemen, this is such a fundamental change, which means that the supervisors have to learn. You have to learn. We all have to learn. And that's the learning curve. And I think that after some years, we will all agree that a lot of the things here are not necessary. And we'll remove them. Because then we have understood that you can have different views about the principle. I'm a lawyer. Terrible. It's what an admission of guilt, you know. But I'm a simple lawyer. So for me, it is obvious that for every problem, there are at least 3 solutions. So it is not true that there is just one single answer to a question. There are at least 3 answers to a question. And I just agree with that. And that's a question of maturity before the system feels happy with that. That's the bird of Solvency II. Most important change. Capital market crisis in the beginning of the century helped Solvency II. The fact that market risk was not considered under Solvency I, was not a risk that you had to take into account under Solvency I, but the fall of the stock exchange at the beginning of the century made insurers learn that there is not just insurance risk, underwriting risk. There are other risks, such like market risk. Crucial elements, and these are very important. These three topics are important. An economic risk-based approach. Not a legalistic risk-based approach, it's an economic risk-based approach. Now we all agree, many of you are economists. I'm teaching at economics faculties at 2 universities, so all my students are economists. I have to teach them as a lawyer. And for economists, what is the economy? How do you define, how do you value, how do you measure economic risks is quite a challenge. And again, here as a lawyer, I have no problems with that. Because obviously there is not one single answer to many questions. Linkage between risk and capital. That's something that insurers have and will have to learn is that when you engage in risks, it has capital consequences. When the guy sells an insurance policy, he has to know that he might cause risky business for his insurer, and therefore there may be a need for capital. That was not necessarily the case in the past, and the best insurers today are those who throughout the chain have that reality installed in the system. The crucial role played by risk management. Risk management is absolutely crucial, and we will talk about that now for the rest of my presentation. That everybody in the world now recognizes that this is the way forward for insurance is a fact. Not everybody agrees exactly on how to do it, but the basic principle that we need such an approach is no longer in debate. That's a slide, ladies and gentlemen, of which I am the author. You may have seen it in many books. I'm the author. I should have had my, charge on it, but I don't care, because what is important is that you see that this is the house of Solvency II, which has three pillars: a quantitative pillar, a qualitative pillar, and a transparency pillar. And the rule of the house is insurance group supervision. We won't talk about that today, but that's one of the most complex areas of supervision. But the house of Solvency II is important, and if you know that the system is based on three pillars, you know about everything you need to know about Solvency II. And that's why I'm going to ask you a question about it. Which of those three pillars is the most important one? And I'm very curious. Who would say pillar one? Hands in the air. Only two. Who says pillar two? There's more. Who says pillar three? A sole preacher in the desert. I agree with you, it is very important. And de facto, it's the most costly pillar under Solvency II. But it was the most necessary one. Because what we don't have in Europe yet still today is transparency in the sector. And we will have it after pillar 3. But it's interesting to see that so few people in this room say it's pillar 1 that's the most important one. Because I've been criticized for having created a solvency regime that's mainly to the benefit of the actuaries. Some people didn't like that. Just imagine what we did. 2 capital requirements. How funny that is. Not 1 like the bankers. We got you 2 capital requirements. You know. And so all the complexity of how they relate to each other, how you calculate those. But it is obvious that it does not matter which of the pillars is the most important one, because they operate together. And pillar 1 cannot function with the governance and risk management aspects of pillar 2. And it cannot work without pillar 3, because pillar 3 guarantees that everybody is applying the same principles. And we will see that later this year, when for the first time insurers will have to publish their solvency and financial condition reports. It will come out around June this year. This is important. We will learn so much about each other. We presume that we know, but then we will know a lot. And we'll be able to say which are the good guys, which are the bad guys. It will be interesting to have that topic. Now, what is the most important risk? What is the most important risk?
It depends on the business line.
Exactly. It depends on the business line. Of course, in insurance you would say it's underwriting risk, it's the insurance risk. But again, that doesn't matter. Risks are important, and a risk may be less important for you than it is for another party, because it's based on the way you do your business. But it is important that we realize that we have all these risks that they could, in times, become very important. These are the general governance requirements, these are the principles. The first one is the first bullet here. Solvency II requires all insurers to move from implicit governance to explicit governance. What does that mean? means basically that all people who work in an insurance company had to write down what they were doing. Now, if I ask you to do that, just to write on a sheet of paper what you are doing on a day-to-day basis, to whom you report. Many people find that very difficult. And that is very important on the Solvency too, that all these things are clear, which of course helps an efficient business organization. Sound and prudent management, adequate, transparent organizational structure, clear allocation and appropriate segregation of responsibilities, effective system for ensuring transmission of information, proportionality, we'll come back to that in a minute, and then the persons in charge of key functions. We'll say what that is. Members of the board and persons effectively running the business must be fit and proper. Do you know that in some countries in Europe, the supervisor has asked the members of the board to come and visit in order to do a little exam. And the supervisor would ask them, what is Solvency II? Are you sure that all board members in insurance companies know what Solvency II is? Are you sure that most people in boards of insurance companies know what insurance is? I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I have seen astonishing things in the industry. But that is something that is required under the new regime, is that people are fit and proper. And fit has nothing to do with fitness. Fit means you need to know what you're talking about. And proper means you cannot be Donald Trump. That's basically proper. You need to be a person of integrity and not full of conflicts of all kinds.
Unfortunately, you can still be elected.
Yeah, no comment about that. That's democracy. The governance functions, these are the principles again, written down. The board's responsibility, regular review, and these are the key functions, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I know in France there was a lot of debate about that introduction of these functions, but these are the 4 key functions that we identify in the Solvency II, and of course I cannot refrain from asking the question, which is the most important governance function? Maybe you forgot what they were. Here they are. Risk management, internal control and compliance, internal audit, actuarial. Which actuary were saying that? Which one is the most important one?
Risk management.
Risk management, of course, yeah. It doesn't matter. Here again, it does not matter which you find the most important one. The idea of Solvency is that these functions have a good interplay with each other. That is very crucial. A company that is completely run by actuaries is unlikely to perform to the standard that we want. Not that I have anything against actuaries. I'm an honorary fellow of the Institute of Actuaries, so I have to be very careful what I say about actuaries. But the world is broader than just actuarial science. Let's agree on that. So, risk management is very important. But risk managers can also get carried away. And it's good that there's an actuary coming and saying, this is it. Let's talk about the real thing. Where in that system that I've just outlined, where are the 3 lines of defense? I'm sure you must be aware of this debate that has been going on for decades in theory about the 3 lines of defense. Where are they under Solvency? Nowhere. Intentionally, I did not want to introduce that because I'm an opponent of the 3 lines of defense, because it is misleading traditionally in the banking sector, you say the operational area is one area of defense, you need to organize that well. Then you have the risk management that supervises the whole thing. And then you have internal audit. These are traditionally the 3 lines of defense. But where are the actuaries? And under Solvency II, for the actuaries present here, I can tell you, your role is absolutely crucial. And you are indeed also a line of defense. Because you have the say about the technical provisions. You have to remind the board that this is not a little game you're playing with. This is important. And you must be satisfied that they have been properly calculated and report on those. So that's the line of defense. And what about the external auditor? It's an area that's increasingly important, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you maybe from audit firms, again, a message, life is beautiful. There's going to be a lot of work asked from the external auditors also in terms of helping that issues are properly dealt with. So, proportionality, yes, is a principle that is written into the directive, and it is repeated at several places. And I remember when I was writing with my team the Solvency II text, we had arguments with our legal service in the Commission, and they were telling me, you do not have to write this principle into the law, because the proportionality principle is a principle of European law already. So it's obvious that it applies. And I told them, if it's so obvious, I write it in the law anyway. So it is in there. And then I had a meeting with the member states, experts, and they were happy with the proportionality principle. And I said, give me some examples. Give me some examples of proportionality so that I can write them into the law. What happened, ladies and gentlemen? Silence was golden. No reaction. Is this a problem? No, this is not a problem. Because we were learning by doing it. It's good that we have the principle in the law. It applies to you as an insurer. It applies to the supervisor. It applies to EIOPA. It applies at all stages of the process. Supervisory powers. The supervisors in Europe, and that's true in France as it is in Germany or in Italy, under Solvency II have far more powers than ever before. And you will feel it, because they will use their powers. And it is right that they do that. Because even with all the details that you have in the regulation, Solvency II is still very much, and that's what I liked about it, putting the burden where it belongs. Solvency I was a very paternalistic system. Solvency II puts the responsibility with the industry. And that's where it belongs, the boards of companies. A supervisor, the ACPR in France, cannot run your company. They hopefully know a lot about your company, and possibly more than in the past. But they will have to rely on you. You have to do the job. And that's why it's important that the supervisor has the powers to say, once in a while, what needs to be done. Let's go then quickly over the risk management regime, which is now spread over the directive, the delegated regulation, implementing technical regulations, the guidelines of EIOPA, so all the stages. We'll go over those in a little bit of time here. That's the again, remind you of the fact this is principle-based. That all these words are important. It's a system of risk management, not a function. We come back to that in a minute, because the function is part of the system. Strategies, processes, reporting procedures. And what did you do? Identify. That's where you start. You measure. It's not always easy to do that. You monitor, see what's happening. You manage, you take action when necessary. And you report on a continuous basis, not once a year, on a continuous basis. The risks at an individual level at an aggregated level, and also the interdependencies. I mean, that's the risk management system. I think that's basically encapsulating the whole process. And then it must be effective and well integrated into the structure. These are the principles. Crucial is the role of the board. And it is something that maybe some board members will have to learn the hard way. But it is a board that is ultimately responsible. And each insurer will have to define its risk appetite, overall risk tolerance. And sometimes you may not want to conclude a certain contract because it's not part of your risk tolerance. It exceeds your limits. I mean, you have to know your limits. And people in the business, in the company need to know that. So that is very important, this board responsibility. And then the question, of course, you can ask yourself, must each board member have had some prior experience in insurance? You are the ACPR, and you get in front of you a person who has been on the board of this particular insurer for 10 years. You ask him, what is insurance? I say, well, I don't know. Would you keep him on the board? I mean, these are questions. I mean, it is not an academic question. I mean, these are real questions that the ACPR faced. It's not that you have a pot full of potential directors where you just dig out another one. You know, you have these companies, you have these boards, and I'm absolutely certain that the ACPR will have told a number of people, "We keep you on there, but I call you next year. I'll see what progress you have made in your knowledge," because the strategic importance of the board's responsibilities. How can the supervisors assess the capabilities of the board to assume the responsibility for the risk management system? How can you do that? By calling them in. Not asking them to send a form. I want to see the people. I want to meet the CRO. I want to meet the chief actuary. I want to meet these people. The chairman of the board. The guy, the head of the audit committee. I call them in. Separately, not together. If necessary, together. Especially if they don't talk the same language. To see what happens. But that's how you ensure, as a supervisor, that things are properly under control. The policy, the different risk categories, we'll come back to that. And then, of course, these are the sort of risks that we identify, of course, included in the SCR, but also not fully covered by the SCR. Because the SCR, ladies and gentlemen, has also something that there's a lot of confusion about. What is the Solvency capital requirement? The Solvency capital requirement does not reflect all the risks. It reflects the risks that we can quantify, but we have identified those. We, that's to say the regulators, have identified those in a standard model. Why did we have a standard model? Does it make sense, ladies and gentlemen, to say that we want a solvency regime that is economic, risk-based, and at the same time tell the companies, and you have to use a standard formula? That's not logical. Because a standard formula, by definition, is wrong. Because it is what the Romans call quod plerumque fit. What fits for everybody, so it fits for nobody. Your system will necessarily not be properly reflected in the standard formula. And you need to know that. And that's why the logic of Solvency II is that companies apply internal models. And that's why I was very, very instrumental for having that principle in the directive. And just imagine, this is a real story, I get called in by my director general. And he says, "Carl, I have some serious problems with what you're doing here. Because, first of all, you say under Solvency II that all assets and liabilities must be measured on a market consistent basis. Fair value. And he said, we just had a banking crisis. And everybody's saying that the banking crisis was caused by the application of fair value. I start to explain to him that that is untrue. The banking crisis was caused by the banks, not by the measurements in their balance sheets, which they were faking anyway. So that was it. So I got him a little bit confident here. And then he says, and I've heard that you allow insurers to use internal models. But I've been told that the financial crisis was caused by banks faking their models. And I explained to him, modeling in insurance is, at least for insurance risks, different from modeling of market and credit risk. And that there is some experience in that. And of course we have the approval requirement. But it's good to remind yourself always of the fact that the SCR and what comes out of that, because I see sometimes these insurers saying, I have a solvency capital requirement of 250%. Oh, I'm a rich man, you know. And then you have the poor guys that don't want to admit they only have a solvency requirement of 120%. What does the law say? It has to be 100%. Full stop. All the rest is nonsense. Of course, that you have a solvency capital requirement that is higher than 100% because of the volatility, and you don't want to have, I accept that. But there is no need to impose these SCR levels of 200%, as I see in some member states, that is the practice. That is not right. No. But the SCR, you know, we have to always keep in mind the relative importance of the SCR. Now, these are some of the areas that must be covered by risk management. I will not go into details here because this, I suppose that you are familiar with that. What is important is the role of the credit rating agencies, where there is still responsibility now, more than there was in the past, on insurers to have their own credit assessment, which of course for small insurers is not evident. But you must look beyond the AAAs that are published on the market. I know that there are some difficulties with the credit rating agencies, but that is also something that will pass by. Prudent person is very nice. The prudent person principle. Do you know, this was called differently. We introduced this principle for the first time, not in insurance, but for pension funds. The Pension Funds Directive includes that principle. But it was initially called the prudent man principle. Yes, we were called to order by the European Parliament. We had to change because it is sex neutral, of course. We should all be prudent, not just the men, but also the women should be prudent. So the prudent person principle it is.
They're usually more prudent than the men.
Well, that is again changing. This is a changing element, which is fine. But it's, you know, that's what it is. You know, you can read it again, but it is very important that people realize that investment in insurance is not just something that you can do just like that. Asset liability matching is very important. Politicians once in a while need to be reminded of that. An insurer is not investing in infrastructure to help France to survive. No, I mean, that's absolute nonsense. An insurer will only invest in infrastructure if that investment can be properly allocated as part of a long-term liability strategy. But if you don't have long-term liabilities, you're not going to invest in infrastructure. That's obvious. For people who know. For politicians, not always, but they can learn, politicians. I know from experience. What are the key elements of a high-quality risk management? The most important thing, ladies and gentlemen, is the right tone from the top. That is very important. You cannot have a good risk management if the top of the business is not insisting on that all the time and doing it also in what they are doing. But that's very important. The key qualities of a good CRO. Good CRO. Key qualities. Critical mindset. Not taking things for granted. A searching spirit. Because risks are everywhere. In the cupboards sometimes. The old fight. So very important to have that. Internal models. I told you what the philosophy is on the Solvency II. I know not many companies apply internal models, but they may not be able to do so. They may be on the way to do that. They may apply a partial internal model. But if you apply an internal model, your risk management must justify your capability of applying that model. Because when you apply an internal model, you're basically saying, I'm smarter than the regulator. I know myself and my risk better than the regulator does. Show me. That's basically what we ask. And that brings us to what is very important, ORSA. I have no idea how you say that in French, because ORSA is ORSA, ladies and gentlemen. It is known throughout the world, own risk and solvency assessment. It is a process that we have introduced. The bankers also have a similar regime. But it is important that insurers are not gaming the system. And so we require them every year, at least once a year, to carry out this assessment of their own risks. And to link that to the solvency requirements and to see whether there are any gaps and take whatever correcting measures from that. Basically, that is what ORSA is. A lot of attention is being paid to ORSA. Basically, these bullets tell you what it is. ORSA should ensure that an insurer does not engage in business for which it does not have sufficient capital. Remember what I said in the beginning, the linkage between risk and capital. ORSA should allow the insurer to assess the quality and quantity of financial resources available relative to its needs. Don't overjump. Do what you're capable of doing. No separate consideration of risk and capital. And ORSA is the DNA of the insurance company. Through the ORSA, you get to know your business. And that's why the ORSA must be conducted as an exercise, not by the CRO on a Sunday morning at home, but during the week with all departments involved in that. That's very, very important. So what should it be? A continuous process to ensure that risk and solvency are key factors in decision making. A key component of the risk management culture, and a project supported by all key stakeholders, not just by a few and the others don't. What should it not be? A compliance reporting exercise. It was very funny. You can check that. There are no rules on ORSA. There is no guideline, there is no measure that explains how to write your ORSA report. Is that an accident? No, it was not an accident. We didn't want it. Because if I had provided you with a format for the ORSA report, it would be a tick-the-box exercise. And I don't want it to be a tick-the-box exercise. I want everybody to use their creativity. That's the best way of reflecting what ORSA is. It should not be performed for the supervisor. That is not necessary. Like the students, when you're teaching, the students, the last lecture you give before the exams, the students ask, what do we need to know for the exam? But the same, the insurer goes to the supervisor, what do I need to do for you? not for you, not for the supervisor. It is for yourself, That is very important. It's not a new capital requirement and should not replace the regulatory capital requirement. The risk management function now, one of the key functions, fit and proper. Very important is the position of the CRO in the management structure of the undertaking. Written policy, reporting to the board, that is very important. And so we have a question for you. Should each insurance undertaking have a CRO? Yes. Yes, if you mean by that, somebody must be in charge of the risk management system. That's correct. But we don't need to have officers in all the companies because we already have quite a few today. We have a CFO, a CIO, a CEO, a CRO, and many other OOOs coming. So in the end, you have so many bosses in the company that you don't have soldiers anymore. And that is not possible.
Like the Mexican army.
The Mexican army, yes.
Many generals.
Yeah, but this happened. I remember when we were developing Solvency II, we interviewed small and medium-sized insurers. And we invited them, the member states identified some, and they came to see me. And so I had this German insurance company, very, very small. And the CEO came and he explained his worries about Solvency II. And he said he was not sure he would be able to operate under Solvency II because he was the only university graduate in the company. All the others were just soldiers, I said, it's not a problem. I have no problem with that. We have the proportionality principle. You don't need to have officers if you don't have an army. I mean, what is important is that the duties are carried out and that people are assigned responsibilities. But you don't have to call them officers. Very important is this second question. To whom should the CRO report? There's different models that exist. And here again, I'm not telling you this is the only possible model. Because governance models should reflect the culture of a business. And we should not impose specific models. But it's obvious that if you have a chief risk officer that reports to the chief financial officer, that is not a very good system.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. The chief financial officer is in charge of managing the capital. The chief risk officer is in charge of determining it. You have a conflict of interest directly.
Yes. And I can tell you that one of the largest European insurance companies, the chief risk officer is reporting to the chief financial officer. I will not identify the company. It has been a controversial issue because I did say that in Germany once, and it was not particularly appreciated. But
I think personally it is a conflict of interest.
I would not say it's a conflict of interest, but it could lead to problems. It's a little bit like the Trump situation, but there it's a conflict of interest problem. Task of the risk management function. Assist the board, monitor the system, the risk profile, report to the board, very important, design of the internal model. Yes, I know the actors here in the room may be unhappy with the fact that they are not in charge of the internal models. We gave this to the chief, to the risk management function. There was a hot debate, I can entertain you for a long time, about the war between these two competing camps. But that is the decision that we took. Do actors then play no role whatsoever in terms of internals? Yes, they do, of course, because they assist also the risk management function in dealing with the risks. And that's why there is a close cooperation with the actuarial function. almost at the end, ladies and gentlemen. Reporting about risk management. That's what I said earlier. We will have the solvency and financial condition report, which companies will have to release for the first time this year. Look what you will be able to read. Just look at these bullet points. A description of the system of governance. Oh, that'll be interesting to read that. An assessment of its adequacy for the risk profile of the undertaking. Wow! Oh, I think we'll spend our summer holidays reading lots of interesting reports. A description separately for each category of risk, of the risk exposure, concentration of risks, strategies to mitigate those risks, and sensitivity analysis. Oh, no need to go back to school. We just have it all in front of us. And then we report to the supervisors. That's of course what you won't read. That's what the supervisor will read. Supervisory reporting, regular, it's already going on. The ORSA supervisory report. Very interesting discussions are taking place between companies and the supervisor on the ORSA report. And of course, it's very costly. Everybody had to go through these templates, very detailed. But the nice thing about it is that I think in 2 years' time, it'll be the first time in European history that academics will be able to do real research on insurance. Today, any research on insurance is amateuristic because we don't have that numbers. The Americans have had numbers for decades. Their system is not as good as our system, but they have the transparency and therefore a lot of interesting research. Research is still relevant in order to make these progress. And this is then the moment to conclude, of course. More emphasis on the responsibility of the individual undertaking. I have said that once at a conference in Brussels, I said Solvency II is good for you. And it became a slogan. And my name is now attached to it because anytime you use that, people will know it comes from me. I'm preparing a book on Solvency II. It should have been published a long time ago. And the title is Solvency II is good for you. You can Google it. You can actually Google it and already order pre-copies because many have already bought the book. But why is it good for you? Because if you look at all the stakeholders, the benefits of Solvency II are not to be underestimated. And one of the benefits is that it puts the responsibility back to where it belongs. There is no need for paternalistic regulatory action. Companies can do their business well. You just have to give them the framework within which they operate, and that implies the prudent person principle, investment strategy, a good asset liability management, key good effective working governance functions, and a mature ORSA event at least once a year. Solvency II recognizes the strength and the weakness of human nature. Why do we do that? Because we focus more on risk management. You can build the best capital adequacy regime, but if the people that operate that regime are crap, your system will be crap. And the human nature is weak, and that's why we need to have proper checks and balances in the system, and that is what governance is all about. But obviously, and that is the last thing that I want to say, is that Solvency II was not born on the 1st of January 2016, when it became applicable at last. You may not have been behaving like me. You can imagine, as the father of Solvency II, what I did on the 31st of December 2015. Obviously, I had to drink my obligatory bottle of French champagne to celebrate the birth of Solvency II, which took many years to develop. which is not the best system in the world, and is definitely not perfect, but it is like democracy, ladies and gentlemen. It can always be improved. And it's very important that you apply the regime with sufficient common sense. I remember one day when I was dealing with accounting, and I was sitting at the International Accounting Standards Board, and I was fighting the Americans, and I was criticizing them because they wanted a new accounting standard. And I said, stop it with all these standards. I said, just tell people to use their common sense. And the Americans turned to me and said, Carl, how do you define common sense? I said, well, you haven't understood. But that is what it is all about, ladies and gentlemen. Any regulation you can develop, if you don't use your common sense and are prepared to stand up for it to your supervisor, to your shareholders, to your management, then you're not doing good business as you're supposed to do. So, now the floor is yours.
More questions or comments? So, sure.
Could I
Sure.
add
Go
a
ahead.
comment?
No problem.
Very, very much related to what you're saying about ORSA and people. From my experience of managing the ORSA process at SCORE, it is very complex, particularly when you're a big group, a worldwide group. And we see that there are many different types of skills. This might be of interest to the students here, and that we're looking for actually, because we definitely need high quality people. And those skills are probably in 3 categories, and you very rarely get someone who can do all. Like in French, we say un mouton à 5 pattes. It'd be great if we could, but we really need people who are very good at coordinating this process, which is worldwide, across the group. And that's not an easy thing to do. You have to listen, and many iterations of discussions. You need people for the report who can write excellent English for the board, not too complicated or technical. And then, as you say, they're all as important as each other, but the third one is the people who can think out of the box and always turning the stones, what's the next risk? Can pollution over the next 30 years have an impact on mortality? Can plastics get into the food chain and have an impact on mortality? Anything like that. So, as I say, you rarely get someone who can do all 3. So you have to, if you can do 2 out of the 3, it's brilliant. So what we have to do is mix teams that are good at each one and get them to work together. And that's another challenge.
Yeah, I can only agree. I mean, you say that from practice. I never worked in the business world, but I worked in administration, government administration, where it has a similar challenge, of course.
Yeah.
Because if you're all the same people, you need, and you work, I worked in the commission, you have different cultures, because language groups, you have all the confusion because people don't understand the words and so on. But that makes life exciting. And that's why, for instance, it would be good, as part of risk, once to organize something about governance, because that is governance in practice, with all the problems dealing with people, how to organize people. Recruiting people, yes. For instance, one of the functions that we haven't talked about today, because it was not particularly on the agenda, is the internal control function, the compliance function. Question is, who should be in charge of compliance? Some companies will say compliance means to check whether the rules are being complied with. Therefore, who should be the compliance officer? It should be a lawyer. I would say no, exactly for the point you said. I mean, if you put a lawyer in charge of the compliance function, he's got to be the tick the box guy. I don't want a tick the box guy. I want a guy who understands the business. Ideally, having worked in insurance and knows where the problems come from. And that's the interplay between qualities and experiences which makes business better than another.
A question about this principle that you mentioned, prudent person principle, which means that you have to invest in assets that you can measure, control, identify properly, and so forth.
Yeah.
Do you consider that under Solvency II, the shareholders are the ability to invest properly is according to this principle in insurance businesses? Because I think, according to me, Solvency I was quite impossible to do this. Is it right now the case for you?
That
It's not anymore a black box. An insurance company is not anymore a black box.
Yeah, so your question is whether an insurer can invest in another insurance company.
Or everybody,
Shareholder.
according to this
Okay,
prudent
no.
person principle.
Yeah, but the prudent principle, of course, is looking at it from the insurer's point of view. Right? I, as an insurer, invest in something else, but it is obvious that there is not yet, there will be more transparency on the insurance industry once we have the Solvency and Financial Condition Report published this year. The problem in insurance is that the financial statements of insurance companies are completely incomprehensible. And we have a new international accounting standard coming out, IFRS 19 or something, which will come out, should be adopted before the end of this year, but it's already a year past, so it's hopefully this year. And that will change things a little bit. So, because what is the problem of an investor? You want to compare. And if the data are not comparable, it's very difficult. And my experience with the investment community, particularly in London, for instance, is because I've been to see the London investment community to discuss Solvency II, because they wanted to invest in insurance businesses. So I explained to them how Solvency II operates and so on. And they said, in the end they said, well, it's still rather complex, so maybe we still prefer to invest in banks. And I told them, in banks, my friends, I mean, can you believe anything more risky than a bank, But that is the problem of the sector. The sector, insurance, is complicated. And it is wrong to look at an insurance company just to look at the SCR. The SCR, of course, is an important message, but it's not enough.
But then, if you come back to this principle that you mentioned several times, you have this quite nice picture of the house where you put
Yeah.
three pillars, and then on the top you have the supervisor group. Why don't you try to put the shareholders somewhere there? Because the thing is, most of the time they're lacking the data, the information. And functionality is always the same. When you don't get the information, you cannot properly, like you say, measure, monitor, and everything. And the thing, when you owner, you can maybe better do it simply because it's common sense. You own it. And supervisor, they don't just own it.
Yeah. No, but this thing is certain, there'll be more transparency. But the transparency that exists will not mean that you can, like in industrial companies, just look at the ratio and say that's a good investment. In insurance, you need to do more. Yeah, that's true. Whoever is.
First, I have to say I am not at all from the field. I have two questions. The first one is, what is the impact of this type of regulation on industry structure in terms of competition, in terms of small actor and big actor? The second question is, if we want to do some perspective, we may say, okay, our society is changing, allude of it, well, the car will disappear more or less, or they will be automated car, the decisions are made by a robot, are not made by human, the life expands. So how this would affect qualitatively using the Solvency III that I am sure you will do in the future?
Well, I'll start with the last question because I haven't said it here yet, but I will say it now. There won't be a Solvency. It cannot be. It cannot be because if you believe that a risk-based solvency regime is what you want, that is Solvency II. And you cannot call it Solvency III because they will not be different. The Solvency II system, the way it is being designed, principle-based, as I said, will be at regular intervals be reviewed. And the first review is being prepared already for 2018, which is close by, and then 2020. So rather than to have a system like the bankers have, Basel II, Basel III, Basel III.5, Basel whatever, many Basels to come, we have Solvency II. But we update it. It's part of the system. It's intentionally made that certain issues will be reviewed. For instance, capital charges. We measure risks in capital charges. Well, these measurements are based on experience from the past, because we don't know about the future. Now, these experiences were not as detailed as we will have it now under Solvency II. So it's obvious that in 2-3 years from now, we have a better insight in risks so that we can remeasure the capital charges. There's another example. Your question about the changing technological environment, that will affect the insurance industry profoundly. It will also have an impact on regulation, obviously, and on supervision. And if you're interested in that, the best thing I can recommend you is to read a paper that has been released on the 19th of December by EIOPA. You can Google EIOPA. And you'll find it there. And it is about the impact of data, big data, on the insurance industry and on supervision and regulation. So that's probably the best answer I can give you to your question. Your first question was about
The industrial organization.
yeah. It was a concern that we had from the beginning, whether the introduction of a sophisticated regime would have a negative impact on the number of players in the market, would lead to consolidation of the market. What do we see today? It only works a year, the new regime. We haven't seen that consolidation. There is consolidation in the market, but there has been consolidation in the market before Solvency II because of economic developments. What you will see in insurance now is particularly in the life business, that some companies are struggling to offer life products. They have a portfolio of old contracts which are difficult to run, that they are looking for a bigger group to manage this business. So in that sense there's some consolidation, but the fear that was expressed before Solvency II, that we would have a market with less players, I haven't seen that realized yet, which I'm happy, because we want many players.
Yeah, it's a comment about principles. I mean, I'm a very big proponent of Solvency II and what has happened in the industry. But I think fundamentally, the economists have not been able to value long-term liabilities. And all the models we have for long-term liabilities are flawed because they always discount with interest rate. And one of the problems I have is this, your boss that said about economic valuation. I think we should use economic valuation. I often say, why should we break the thermometer when we have fever? But on the other hand, I think theoretically, economists haven't really tackled this problem seriously. You know, most of the valuation theory was for liabilities of 1 year, 3 months. But when you talk about liabilities over 30 years, I'm putting this as a question. And, and something we should discuss.
I'm happy that you put this as a question, because it's a question for which I do not have an answer, but I entirely agree with you. For me, what was important that in Europe we had a common approach. And I know the long-term guarantee package means that there are different approaches within the same approach, which I did particularly like. But what really matters, first of all, is that we agree on how to do it. That's the first. Because it took us 30 years in Europe to agree on how to measure a long-term liability. 30 years! Now we've done it. The second realization is, it's not perfect. And why is it not perfect? Because we basically use the accounting approaches. And accountants have always struggled with long-term liabilities. Because, it is one of the problems of the IASB, they say we have the same conceptual framework for all companies and all business models. I'm not sure. I think we need to reflect about accounting data for businesses which have very long liabilities, like pension funds or life insurers and so on, and possibly also in risky business, natural reinsurance and so on. The real long-term business. Whether we need to, for instance, one of my problems was I had to write into the directive, the accounting principle, that assets and liabilities are valued separately. And it is obvious, of course, that in insurance, when you go the long term, that there is a very close linkage between these assets and liabilities. And therefore, to have a system of measurement, they would take that into account, would seem to me not unlogical. But the accountants haven't done that. And so I could not change that. But you have now time. Your bright mind. What a beautiful assignment I can give you today to help the world become a better place.
There were some economists suggesting that the government should put on the market long-term debts, something like a century. I think maybe something should be done.
France has issued a 50-year bond.
Yes. Because then you'll have a market.
We have eternal bonds, so
and it will force the market to value those things.
yeah.
Yes, we can work. I think that's true. I think researchers who are here in this room, they should think about this problem, definitely. But also I think we should encourage the market to increase, rather than saying, okay, life insurance, it's just bad business, as many people say, we should encourage...
Until interest rates go up.
Yes, exactly. We should rather think of fostering the market to go longer time. And we have to do that with the climate change and all those problems that we have today, immigration and all of that.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I will read anything interesting you write.
It's even worse in Asia. They have long-term, whole life cancer products. So we have to guarantee the premiums for 50, 60, 70 years.
Okay, one last question.
So you made several parallels between the solvency regime for insurance, so Solvency II, and what already existed on the banking side. And in the process of building Solvency II, did you leverage on what already existed on the banking side, and especially learned from the difficulties or identified mistakes within the banking solvency regime?
Yes, that's a very good point. You made. You see, the bankers will never look at what the insurers do, but the insurers look at what the bankers are doing. Because being a banker is something very special. It was obvious that when we started Solvency II, and you can read that in the explanatory memorandum and the impact assessment that we published in 2007, that we looked at the banking sector. For instance, the three-pillar approach comes from Basel. The use of internal models. The three-tier capital structure, which we have in insurance, we took from Basel, but then Basel changed it. So the bankers do no longer have a three-tier structure, but a two-tier structure. And in insurance, we now have a three-tier structure. So we were more obedient to the bank. So we have done that. What we haven't done, and there's a lot of criticism about that today, is that the capital charges that we assign to risks in the standard formula were developed based on insurance experience and expertise. And we did not say we take the same capital charges that exist in the banking sector. Why did we not do that? Because Basel is an international framework. So it goes beyond Europe. And so, don't quote me on that, but the way Basel operates, I sometimes wonder how they arrive at certain conclusions. It's obvious that under the Basel Accords, the capital requirements were often not properly dealt with, or were so broad that everybody just had a Mickey Mouse game with it. So they're dealing with that. But it may be, for instance, that an investment in infrastructure would have a capital charge under insurance, which is higher than if it is a bank that does the same investment, which is not logical. But then, of course, you also have to look at the confidence level. We have a 99.5, the banks have a 99.9, depending on the timing differences and so on. So it's not easy, but it is one of the things to do. And that is another area for research, which is very important today, is to see how both sectors are going to evolve in the future, and to see to what extent we can narrow the difference in regulation, particularly in those areas where there is no real need for a difference. If you look at credit risk modeling, whether that's a bank or an insurer, doesn't matter. Insurance risk, of course, is typical for insurance. So we did consider it. We didn't go all the way to the end for the reasons I've explained, but it is definitely an area you can see if you go to the website of the European Commission and you look at some of the papers they've published on growth initiative, on capital markets, and some of the changes they have recently proposed. I think it was as late as December on a new banking reform in Europe. Reference is made in these documents to the need to align with Solvency II, which is interesting because there is no need to depart from each other if it is not necessary to do that.
Banks should start modeling their liabilities, not only their assets. They don't do it, and they're not required to do it.
Well, the problem is that banks know more about the asset side. Insurers know more about the liability side. And that's why the central banks today are now called upon to supervise the insurance industry, because they don't know anything about the liability side. Anyway.
Thanks so much again.